Good afternoon. I'm Dan Wilczek, a member of the Board of Directors of the Bayfield Heritage Association. It's my pleasure to welcome you to the second installment of BHA's 2022 John Matthew Black program series. This program, Building Blocks of America, explores the history of the boom and bust quarry industry in Bayfield and the Apostle Islands. These quarries and the thousands of tons of sandstone they produced literally made a mark on large and small cities across a broad swath of the United States, ranging from Ohio to Montana. Today's program is supported by a generous grant from the Apostle Island Historic Preservation Conservancy and by contributions from individuals who support BHA. On behalf of BHA, thank you. As in past programs, your microphones will be muted during the program. Please submit any questions you might have using the chat feature at the bottom of the screen, and we will address as many questions as possible at the conclusion of the presentation. I also want to thank Bob Nelson. As most of you know, the breadth and depth of Bob's knowledge of Bayfield's history is simply incredible. When we had an unexpected opening in the lecture series, Bob put together a presentation on quarries with little notice. Bob was familiar with the sandstone cliffs as a child when they served as his diving board into Lake Superior, and he learned details about the quarries from a book that was donated to BHA by Californian Robert Stark of the Frank Stark lineage. That book, Building and Ornamental Stones of Wisconsin, was written by Ernest Robertson Buckley, PhD, in 1898. Buckley's book remains an authoritative text and is often cited in contemporary books and papers regarding the Lake Superior quarry industry. Here are the questions and topics I will cover today. What is brownstone, and why was it a popular building material? Was there anything special about Lake Superior brownstone? We'll review how brownstone was quarried. Then we will take a more in-depth look at 4 quarries: the quarries on Basswood, Stockton, and Hermit Island, and the mainland quarry in Salmo. Last, I will explain why the brownstone industry went from boom to bust in about 35 years. So, let's get the ball rolling. Brownstone is a type of sandstone, which is a sedimentary stone composed of sand-sized particles of rock or mineral with a cementing material that binds it together. At its essence, Lake Superior sandstone is quartz particles cemented with silica. The hardness of the sandstone is determined by the amount of silica or cementing material in the stone. What makes brownstone special is its reddish-brownish color, which comes from dissolved iron in the stone. As Mr. Buckley wrote, the shade of color varies not only between different quarries, but also between different beds in the same quarry. The sandstone from certain quarries has a light reddish-brown color, while that from others is very dark, almost a bluish tone. Besides the many shades of brown and red, white streaks and spots occur in portions of short curtain quarries, giving the rock a variegated color. So why did brownstone become a desired construction material in the second half of the 19th century? If properly selected, brownstone can be quite durable and is not susceptible to cracking under extreme cold or heat. And brownstone that was of a uniform reddish or brownish hue was considered quite attractive. Brownstone was also carvable without great difficulty, allowing it to be shaped into different forms and fashioned into ornamentation. The pictures show 2 examples of this. On the right, we see the brownstone columns that are at the front of the Bayfield Carnegie Library. And on the left, we see the inscription of R.D. Pike that is on the First National Bank building downtown. The use of sandstone was also consistent with the message that architects and owners wanted their buildings to convey. Stone buildings signified status, stability, strength, and security. Why was that important? Remember that this was the period of and the period surrounding the Civil War. That style of architecture developed into what became known as Richardsonian Romanesque, named after the famous architect Henry Hobson Richardson. Richardson's architecture revived the Romanesque style of the 11th and 12th century. His buildings were characterized by asymmetrical design, massive stones, turrets, and columns. His buildings evoked a feeling of heft and permanence. Brownstone was also used because of the threat of fire in large and small cities. There is no better example of the basis of this fear than the Great Fire in Chicago in 1871. In that fire, 300 people died, 3 square miles were devastated, and 17,500 buildings were destroyed. In fact, the Chicago fire served as an advertisement for the value of Lake Superior sandstone. A building constructed with Lake Superior sandstone, the Tribune building, was destroyed, but in vivid testimony to the stone's strength against fire, the walls of the Tribune building remained standing within a landscape where other buildings had been burned to the ground. So what made the area's sandstone so good? First and foremost, it was hard. Lake Superior's sandstone is composed of 87% silica. 20 tests of different samples of Lake Superior sandstone showed that it had a crush rating of 4,816 pounds. Allow me to again quote from Mr. Buckley's book. It is evident to one who has examined the Lake Superior sandstone in the quarry and in the buildings which have been constructed therefrom, that it is admirably suited for the uses to which it is being placed. The stone has been known but a little over a quarter of a century as a building stone, the first building having been constructed in 1870. During this short period, hundreds of the finest buildings in the north central states have been constructed with Lake Superior brownstone. No richer, more beautiful, or more durable structures can be found than those built from #1 Lake Superior brownstone. The color is permanent, frost does not easily injure the stone, and it is only destroyed by intense heat. The results from inspection of the stone in the natural outcrop, where it has been exposed for perhaps thousands of years, further testify to its durability and permanence. Another advantage of Lake Superior sandstone was that it was relatively free of foreign substances such as clay. If clay is present in the sandstone, over time, the sandstone will have unsightly indentations in the stone when the clay is worn away. Lake Superior sandstone is also uniform in color, lacking the white streaks caused by foreign material. The brownstone was graded based upon the uniformity of color, with #1 being the highest grade. Last, being found close to the shore, Lake Superior brownstone could be easily shipped. It is critical to remember that although brownstone buildings can be found in many locations throughout the United States, high-quality sandstone was quarried at only a relatively few places: the Lake Superior South Shore, Hummelstown, Pennsylvania, Portland, Connecticut, and northern New Jersey. To quarry brownstone, the first step is gaining access to the best stone. This illustration is based on Buckley's description of the Basswood quarry. The depths of the various material will vary from quarry to quarry, but the illustration provides a good description of what was required. The Basswood quarry was 400 feet long, 300 feet wide, and 40 feet deep. The first step in accessing the stone was removal of 3 to 4 feet of clay material. Next, you had to remove 15 foot of sandstone rubble that was generally worthless, used primarily as riprap for cribs or breakwater. After that, there was another 2 feet of worthless material before you could get to marketable sandstone. At that point, you reached 7 to 7.5 feet of number 2 sandstone, which meant that it wasn't absolutely uniform in color. It may have had some white streaks or marking. And only under that did you find the true mother lode, 8 to 10 feet of number 1 sandstone. As you might guess, the amount of overburden that needed to be removed determined whether a location was a good site for a quarry. Once you reach the best stone, holes are drilled to create channels, and then holes are drilled at right angles to those channels. A system called plugs and feathers are then placed in the holes to create a crack, which freed a large slab of stone. The stone is then cut into 8-foot by 4-foot by 2-foot blocks, which is the size typically used for shipping. Each block is numbered and transported by tram to the dock for loading on the ship. It's important to note that the stone could not be removed by blasting. Blasting only turned good sandstone into worthless rubble. On this picture, you can clearly see a drill hole that had been drilled into a block on Stockton Island. As quarry operations expanded, more steam-powered equipment was used. This is a photo of a contraption known as a steam donkey. The steam donkey powered a winch that was used to either move materials on the ground or to power the operation of a derrick. On the right hand of this slide, we see an Eclipse steam-powered rock drill, which is an example of a drill that was used at the quarries. The drill could be adjusted so that holes can be drilled at different angles. On the left is a Wardle channeling machine. It operated by chipping action of 3 to 5 chisels while traveling back and forth on a track. The channel machine could make a 3-inch channel in 6 foot of stone in 5 minutes. A well-equipped quarry operation could produce 50 tons of brownstone a day. And here is a picture of a channeling machine in operation at a quarry. This is a photograph of a block of stone that was left on, I believe, Stockton Island. It shows the identifying number that was inscribed on the face of the stone prior to shipment. Here we have a photograph of a section of the Bayfield model railroad. The railroad helps us place the equipment and to understand, I think, better the operation of the quarry. In the upper left-hand corner, we see the steam donkey, which is connected to the derrick to assist in the lifting of heavy blocks. The overburden that has been removed has been loaded into the rail cars. On the upper right hand, we see what is called the benches, which are the different levels of the quarry stone that are exposed as the quarrying operation proceeds. In the middle of the photograph is the large derrick used to load stone onto the train cars. And at the bottom, we see stone that has been cut to size, ready for shipment. Here's a photograph of an operating quarry. Here's another photograph of the same scene. We see here a photograph of a schooner being loaded with brownstone. Buckley wrote of watching the huge blocks of stone being lifted into the schooner. He writes, "The chains and ropes clank and creak so loudly each time that I wondered if they ever broke. I asked the captain. He replied, 'Yes, sometimes, but not often.'" Each block loaded onto the schooner weighed 5 to 7 tons, and a total of 400 to 600 tons were loaded on the ship. As the popularity of Lake Superior sandstone grew, so did the number of quarries producing that stone. In the area from Stockton Island to Washburn, only one quarry existed in 1868, but 7 quarries were in operation 12 years later. Buckley notes, the sandstone belt comprises a strip of land adjacent to Lake Superior, about 6 or 8 miles wide, extending from the northwest corner of the state almost to the Montreal River on the east. As the demand for Lake Superior sandstone grew, there were high hopes for the quarry industry in Bayfield, and no one expressed those hopes better than Curry Bell. On February 14, 1891, Mr. Bell stated the following in the Bayfield County Press. There are now 10 brownstone quarries in the vicinity of Bayfield, 5 of them being located on Bass Island and the others near the city. These quarries give employment to nearly 1,000 men and are owned by parties in New York, St. Louis, and other cities. In my opinion, the quarrying of sandstone is going to take the place of the pine industry when the woods are stripped. On another occasion, Mr. Bell stated, the cities of Lake Superior have each their special line of business. Duluth and Superior seemed destined to be great transshipment points. Ashland has her ore docks. Of no less importance is the brownstone industry, and this business will certainly center at Bayfield, as we have the finest quality of rock and in such abundance that another generation will probably see the entire group of the Apostle Islands, as well as the mainland, completely monopolized by quarries. So let's take a close look at some of these quarries. And we'll start with the Basswood Island Quarry. This was the first quarry in the area that we're covering today. It began as the Basswood Island Brownstone Company. And I should note we'll be talking about various companies at various locations today, and I will be talking only about the first company to operate in that quarry. These companies changed hands and ownerships often over the short period in which the brownstone quarry industry flourished. In the case of the Brownstone Company, it was created for a specific purpose, to provide stone for the facade of the Milwaukee County Courthouse. And the proposal for the Milwaukee County Courthouse specified that it was to be constructed of stone. And a man named Alan Sweet proposed that they should use Lake Superior sandstone. Sweet's proposal was greeted with a great deal of skepticism by the architects for the Milwaukee County Courthouse. So Lake Superior sandstone was subjected to a large number of tests for things such as its crush weight and its fire-resistant characteristics. It was tested by various persons, including someone at the Smithsonian Institution in Washington, D.C. The Lake Superior sandstone passed all these tests with flying colors, and the quarry began operations in 1870, producing in that year 1,200 tons of sandstone for the Milwaukee County Courthouse. As the quarry expanded its operations, it was producing 3,000 tons of sandstone per year in the following 3 years. Almost all the sandstone produced through 1871 was used for the Milwaukee County Courthouse. Thereafter, much of the stone produced was sent for use in building buildings in Chicago. On the right-hand side of the slide, you can see a picture of the completed courthouse in Milwaukee County. Indeed, it is a splendid building. On this slide, we can see 2 pictures of the Bayfield County Courthouse. On the left is a picture of the building in the process of being constructed, and on the right, we see the finished product. On this side, we see 2 additional buildings that were constructed with Basswood Island sandstone: the Abraham Lincoln High School and the Bayfield Central Low School. There are also a number of buildings constructed with Basswood Island sandstone outside Bayfield. As we noted earlier, the Tribune office in Chicago, as was the Plankinton Bank building in Milwaukee, the Germania Bank building in St. Paul, and other buildings in locations such as St. Louis, Missouri, Lincoln, Nebraska, and Detroit, Michigan. A second quarry, the Breckenridge Quarry, was opened on Basswood Island in 1892. That quarry is notable primarily because of the individual who owned it, Colonel John Breckenridge. Breckenridge was a pro-slavery representative from Kentucky. In 1857, he became the youngest vice president in the history of the United States when he served as the vice president for James Buchanan. Breckenridge ran for president in 1860, and he finished third behind Lincoln and Douglas. After the election, he returned to the South, and during the Civil War, he became a Confederate general and ultimately served as the Confederacy's last Secretary of War. The Breckenridge quarry did not produce much material, in part because of the method used to quarry the stone. Breckenridge attempted to quarry the stone by blasting, which, as was noted earlier, merely turned good sandstone into worthless rubble. As you look toward Basswood Island this winter, you might think of the report in the Bayfield County Press on December 30th, 1893, about Mrs. D.F. McCrae. Tony Jeanette, playing Mrs. McCrae's husband, will dramatize the details provided in the newspaper article.
My wife, accompanied by Mrs. Conlon, walked to Bayfield from our island home to get Christmas gifts for our dear child. Accompanied by Thomas Goniat, the two women began their walk back to the island after a few hours of shopping. They left at 3 and expected to complete the 3-mile walk home before dark. But soon, a snowstorm began to rage, weighing them down. They got lost and began to wander aimlessly. When they had not arrived by dark, I grabbed a lantern and compass and went to Bayfield to find my wife. Arriving in Bayfield, I learned they had left several hours previous. My heart was filled with anxiety for my wife's welfare as I hastened back to the island. The forlorn party saw the light from my lantern, and I found them about a mile from home. I tried to lead them to safety, but my poor wife was exhausted and her legs gave out. I picked her up, but was unable to carry her for long. As a last resort, we buried ourselves in snow, our only shelter, for several hours. But my dear wife only grew weaker, and I went home for help. I came back, wrapped my wife in blankets, and the dreary march resumed. We got home between 3 and 4 in the morning, by which time the spirit of my lovely wife had flown, expiring when her earthly home was within view.
On this slide, we see a couple of recent photos of the Basswood Island Quarry. And I want to note my thanks to Dave Cooper of the National Park Service, who provided the recent photos of Basswood Island Quarry, as well as the other quarries we will talk about, and maps of the islands, which show how you can visit the quarries on a visit to the islands. This slide shows one of those maps. It is a map of Basswood Island and shows how, from the trail, you can easily see both the Breckenridge and the Bass Island Brownstone Company quarries. We will now talk about the Stockton Island Quarry, which is depicted in the lithograph on the right-hand side of this slide. The Stockton Island Quarry was the largest quarry on the Apostle Islands. It was operated by the Ashland Brownstone Company and opened in 1886. It produced between 200,000 and 285,000 cubic feet of sandstone per year in the years between 1891 and 1896. The quarry closed in 1897. This slide shows some interesting statistics regarding the Stockton Island Quarry, which is representative of what we might have found on other quarries at this time. The Stockton Island Quarry employed 4 channeling machines, 5 steam derricks, and 2 steam drills. 75 employees typically worked at the quarry when it was in operation. The daily wages that these employees received ranged from $1.50 per day to $3.50 per day. And the cost of transporting the stone from Stockton Island to Chicago was about $2 a ton. The average value of number 1 stones produced by the quarry was about 50 cents per cubic foot. Examples of buildings constructed with Stockton Island sandstone are the Vaughn Library in Ashland and the Night Block building that also was constructed in Ashland. And I should note that the Vaughn Library is not actually constructed of brownstone. Rather, brownstone was used as accent pieces in the building. Buildings outside the area that were constructed with Stockton Island sandstone includes the J.L. Hudson department store in Detroit, the telephone building in Detroit, and a building pictured on the right-hand side, the Cincinnati City Hall. On this slide is another photograph provided by Mr. Cooper of the National Park Service of the quarry as it now exists on Stockton Island. Here is a map of Stockton Island showing how you can use the trail to view the quarry. The Hermit Island Quarry began operation in 1891 when people still had high hopes for the brownstone industry. The operator of the quarry was the Excelsior Brownstone Company, owned by Frederick Prentice. Prentice also owned a very large brownstone quarry at Houghton's Point, where he had employed 250 workers and was producing 623,000 cubic feet of brownstone in 1890. 100 men were initially employed at Hermit Island, but Prentice unfortunately opened the quarry quite late in the brownstone party. Prentice had a grand idea for reinvigorating the demand for brownstone. Though one can't help but admire Mr. Prentice's ambition, his plan would prove to be ill-conceived in more ways than one. Prentice's idea was to quarry from Hermit Island a huge brownstone monolith, shaped as an obelisk and measuring 109 feet tall, with a 9-foot 2-inch square base. The size of the monolith was determined to exceed the size of the largest monolith then in existence, Cleopatra's Needle, which is found in Central Park in New York City. Prentice's plan was that the monolith would be produced and taken to Chicago, where it would be displayed proudly at Wisconsin's exhibit at the upcoming World's Columbian Exposition in 1893. Prentice hoped that the monolith would be a shining example of the quality of Lake Superior sandstone, and that it would be seen by the crowds of people from around the world who would visit the exposition. Freeing the stone was a mammoth undertaking. In the photo, we see a large crew of men with a crowd of observers watching, getting ready to free the monolith using scores of chisels. The Bayfield Press reported that once freed, the plan was to bring in 100 additional men who, with the assistance of 60 jack screws, would raise the monolith and place it on rollers and roll it to the shore to be loaded on a ship. Prentice's promotion attempts, including the monolith, were unsuccessful in stimulating the markets for brownstone. As the National Park Service stated in its application to have the Apostle Island quarries placed on the National Register of Historic Places, it probably did not help that the monolith proved too large to ship. Alas, the crashing and burning of Mr. Prentice's hopes and dreams were not limited to brownstone. Obviously enamored of the beauty of Hermit Island and Lake Superior, he built a beautiful summer cottage on the island. The cottage is shown in the picture, and the Ashland Daily Press provided a detailed description of the cottage, which follows. Mr. Prentice has erected a handsome summer cottage entirely veneered with cedar bark. The columns of the verandas, the chancel of the coquettish balconies are entwined with a rustic beauty of cedar limbs. The cottage is exceedingly well arranged, and 20 guests can be accommodated at one time. Every convenience is provided, including baths and closets. Every inch of the house is utilized, yet the house has an airy, roomy appearance that is refreshing. Every chamber has a broad and sweeping and enchanting view of the surrounding scenery. A broad patriarchal stairway gives it a home-like appearance. The mantels are of brownstone, handsomely and artistically carved to represent the limbs of a tree. The large brownstone chimneys give it an antique air. It is the ideal of solid comfort. Outside, the moss-tinged shingles of cedar bark give the house a beautiful and artistic coloring that no painter can equal. The entire inside is finished in native woods. The observatory at the very peak, the third story, is as snug a spot as could be desired for a rainy day. A pamphlet from that time explains how that beautiful house became another example of Mr. Prentice's misjudgment. The pamphlet states, "Rumor has it that Mr. Prentice built the house as a surprise for his wife, but she was more surprised than he expected her to be. She was shocked. She took one look at the house, isolated, surrounded by wilderness on an island surrounded by rough water, and left. Caring more for his wife than his cedar bark house, he followed her. And for quite a few years, the island was uninhabited again." Then in 1910, the Minneapolis Land Company bought the place, fixed up the bark cottage, and started a summer hotel, hoping to build the place into a thriving tourist center. On the strength of this bright future, the company sold 10 lots of 10 acres each, where summer homes were to be built. But maybe the customers were like Frederick Prentice's wife. They took one look and ran. Anyway, they didn't build, but nature did. She built new trees, bushes, grass, and fine moss for the abandoned quarry rocks. The island went back to the same wild state in which Wilson had found it. The bark house, with its tall observation tower, began to collapse. The wind blew the shingles off the roof, rain came through and rotted the interior. Windows were broken. A bush began to grow through a hole in the floor, reaching out toward the broken windows for all the sunlight it could get. Sometime in the 30s, it was demolished. Here are some photos of the Hermit Island Quarry as it exists today, including a wonderful photo on the left-hand side, which shows how large the quarry blocks are. The last quarry we will review is the Salmo quarry, opened by R.D. Pike in 1884. As you may remember, the first train arrived in Bayfield in 1883, providing another way for easy transport of stone from a land-based quarry. The quarry is located about 3 miles from Bayfield. The quarry had 3 openings, and the best stone came from the northernmost opening, which I believe is the one that is visible from Highway 13. I believe that the quarry opening shown in this picture is the one that is now visible from Highway 13. Here is another picture of the Salmo quarry in operation. And this slide shows 2 photographs of the Salmo quarry taken recently from Highway 13. Sandstone produced from the Salmo quarry was used in local buildings such as the Fish Hatchery and the Pinehurst Inn, as well as in buildings outside the state, such as the Lewis and Clark County Courthouse in Helena, Montana. So we have now explored the events surrounding the boom of the brownstone industry. But what caused the industry to bust after less than 35 years? The most important reason is that the preferred architectural style changed dramatically. Now people desired the high classicism of Beaux Arts architecture, characterized by symmetry, regularity, and smooth, light-colored, marble-like material, such as you would see in the ancient buildings of Rome. This style was almost the exact opposite of Richardsonian Romanesque buildings. What caused such an abrupt change in architectural preferences? The reason was the world's Columbian Exposition of 1893 and its famed White City, which is shown in the photo on the right. Within this environment at the Columbian Exposition, one can't help but think it may not have been all bad that the monolith Prentice was producing proved too large to ship to Chicago, as it would have stuck out like a sore thumb, a testament to what was then out-of-fashion architecture. But there were other reasons also that contributed to the bust in the brownstone industry. New, lighter construction materials were being introduced, such as steel and concrete. Also, with the rapid expansion of brownstone quarries, stone inferior to that found near Lake Superior was marketed and sold. This likely caused damage to the reputation of all sandstone, as it proved to be a less than ideal building material. That concludes my presentation regarding the quarry industry.
Thanks, Dan and Bob, for putting together such an informative program. If you haven't done so yet, please enter any questions you have in the chat. I'm now going to turn it back over to Dan, who will start the question and answer portion of the program. Take it away, Dan.
Thanks, Tony. Someone noted that there was also a quarry in Port Wing, and that is indeed correct. We only focused on 4 of the quarries. As I noted in the course of the presentation, there was a very large quarry operation at Houghton Point. I believe there's also one in Washburn. You get some varying numbers regarding the number of quarries that actually existed on the South Shore. I've had one person mention to me that he thought there were up to 200 quarrying sites along that area. So certainly the quarries in Salmo and on Hermit and Stockton and Basswood Islands were not the only quarries that took advantage of Lake Superior sandstone.
In all of the research that you reviewed, what was one of the most amazing things that stood out to you about this whole quarrying operation on the Apostle Islands?
The thing that really struck me as I was doing this is, I've always lived in the Midwest, and I see the brownstone buildings, all over the place, and certainly there were a number of them in Minneapolis, and just it led me to think that there were just a lot of quarries for brownstone. That brownstone was produced from many areas, including areas that were close to the cities where you found these large brownstone buildings. But in fact, the brownstone was really limited to a small number of quarries that produced really the high quality sandstone. And when you think about that, it really is remarkable how stone from the Apostle Islands and the South Shore made its mark throughout the Midwest, as I mentioned earlier, from Montana to Ohio. It's just is cool to think that material from this area can be still found today in very significant buildings throughout the Midwest. Please speak to the difficulty of carving the brownstone. Well, one reason why brownstone was easily cut is that the brownstone, when it was first exposed, was softer than it was when it was exposed to the air for a period of time. So that didn't relate directly to the carving, but it did relate to the fact that it was easily cut into those blocks, which made it more attractive. The carving, I think, if you think about sandstone, generally it is much easier to work with than, for example, concrete and marble when you're trying to create ornamentation. So I think the fact that you could work the stone while at the same time have a stone remaining that really was very strong and durable in the face of frost and fire was really a key thing for it and its popularity during that time. If sandstone building needs repair today, where do they source the replacement stone? That is a very interesting question. And I don't know the answer to it, but I am going to follow up and I will post an answer to that because it raises a question where the Carnegie Library in Bayfield got the stone that it used to replace the pillars in the front of the building. So I will find out the answer to that question and post it at a later date. Then there's a question about the location of the Prentice House on Hermit. And I believe that was located on the eastern side of the island. I'm not sure how close it was to the actual location of the quarry, but I believe it was there from on the eastern side. I believe that the second photo that we had of it gives a little bit more of a perspective of where it was located from a distance, but I believe it was on the east side of the island. The question about what spurred my interest in the topic, the answer to that is Bob Nelson. Bob Nelson, as I mentioned earlier, put together a lot of information about the quarries. And as I read that material, it really just piqued my interest about it. And there were, as I researched it, some really interesting material about the sandstone quarries, including the two applications that the Park Service put together, seeking to have the quarries placed on the Register of National Historic Places, which brought together a lot of information from a lot of secondary sources that studied brownstone architecture and brownstone quarries. So Bob kind of got me interested, and then further research just really kind of piqued my interest in this area. And when you run across someone like poor Mr. Prentice, who has some stories that are begging to be told, that makes it more fun too.
Dan, there was an earlier question. Romanesque architects like to use two shades of stone in their buildings. Did Bayfield quarries offer two shades, dark brown and tan?
Depending upon the quarry, you would get different shades. And and that person's absolutely right. Some of that Romanesque architecture used different shades of sandstone for highlights in the building. Typically, what you would find is, like for the Milwaukee County Courthouse, they sought all the stone from the same quarry so that the building would be uniform in coloring. But later on, there were efforts to get stone of different colors. Buckley noted that within a single quarry, you could find different shades of stone. But if you really wanted to find the dramatic differences, you needed to get the stone from different quarries, because that's the way you would get really significant differences in shades.
And Hal asked, is there a hard copy in the Bayfield library? I can answer that. Not a hard copy, but we will be producing this video and putting it out online early next week.
Yeah, and someone mentioned the book wrote by Catherine Bishop Eckert. That book would definitely be on the list of resources. It's chock full of information. And the name of the book is Sandstone Architecture of the Lake Superior Region. And if anyone should be interested in taking a look at that book, I found a copy. I'm going to be donating it to the museum. So if you would like to take a look at that book and learn more about the brownstone quarries and the buildings that you can see, there's wonderful pictures of them, of the variety of buildings that were built with sandstone. Let us know at BHA, and we'll be happy to lend you that book so you can explore it in a little bit more detail. Ms. Eckert also wrote a paper, I think probably in support of the Park Service's application to have these quarries placed on National Register of Historic Places, which was largely drawn from her book, but it has some additional information on it also.
There's a question from Lucy. Was the Smithsonian main building in Washington, D.C. made of Lake Superior sandstone?
Good question. I doubt if it was, because in Miss Eckert's book, which is very, very thorough, there's no mention of that. So I'm guessing it was made of sandstone from the East Coast, which is noted in the talk. There was a big quarry in Pennsylvania in Hummelstown. There's also one in northern New Jersey, and then one also in, I believe, Portland, Connecticut. So my guess is the brownstone for the Smithsonian came from one of those quarries. And indeed, that was also true of the brownstone buildings that were constructed in New York City. Most of that brownstone, from what I understand, came from the Portland, Connecticut quarry.
Is sandstone still used today in construction anywhere?
Yeah, it's still used because it does have that amazing durable quality to it. I think what you don't find is buildings that are constructed only of the stone, because they do have a very dated appearance now, almost a dour appearance. But certainly the reasons why sandstone was a good building material in the mid 1800s, they still exist today. But I think you see that more as accent pieces rather than the the primary building material.
What happened to the skilled workers who worked in the quarries following the closure?
Yeah, I don't know exactly, but my guess is that they needed to find a new profession, because when the quarry industry came crashing down, it crashed in a hurry, and that industry really shut down really, really quickly, because it was almost like day and night. And you see the situation where when the building material is very popular, there's a great expansion in the number of quarries as everybody's seeking to cash in on the heavy demand for the brownstone. But after the Columbian Exposition in Chicago, the demand plummeted, and some quarries were able to hang on for a short period of time, but most of them pretty quickly shut down. So I think the folks who worked on those quarries were pretty quickly required to find some other type of occupation, because the demand for quarrying really was really died down fast.
Marissa indicated the Smithsonian facade, the sandstone, came from a nearby quarry in Seneca Quarry, 30 miles from DC.
Oh, okay. Interesting. Well, thanks to everyone for attending, and thanks for the really interesting questions. And we'll post the answers to those two questions that I didn't know the answer to, but we'll track them down. They're interesting questions, and it'd be interesting to find out the answers.
Again, a big thank you to Dan Wilczek for being our presenter today, and to Bob Nelson, whose extensive archive and research made this program possible. Any questions that did not get answered today during this session will be captured and sent to our presenters. Their written answers will be posted on our website. Please be sure to check out our website, bayfieldheritage.org, where our archive has over 80 videos and numerous articles about Bayfield history. While you're there, also check out our virtual 360 tours of our museum and its many exhibits. If you enjoyed today's program and love the resources BHA makes available for free, please consider making a donation today at bayfieldheritage.org/support. None of this would be possible without your continued support. From all of us at Bayfield Heritage Association, we thank you for joining us today, and we look forward to seeing you at our next program.